Michael and I were speaking before the event this evening. First of all, we're very honored and in some ways very humbled by getting this award. Michael said maybe in 10 years we might have deserved it, but we're particularly feel that way because of the work of the Rumi Forum and all the wonderful things and what the Rumi Forum stands for. So as we were sort of out there talking about what our conference were going to be, we decided that we really also wanted to be able to give a little something back for this award that we are getting. And the thing we decided was the best thing we could give is a little piece of advice from the Prophet Muhammad. That's something that we learned when we were working on the documentary, that first documentary that Cynthia made. And if you ever talk to film people, one thing that comes up immediately when they start talking about their work is something called a story arc. Story arc is the most important thing in filmmaking because it's the thing that gives the energy to the film. It's the thing that gives movement, that makes you want to watch. And apropos to the word arc, it usually functions on sort of a U shape if you think about it. And what normally happens, if you think of almost any movie you've ever seen, whether it's a comedy or a drama or a fantasy movie, it typically follows the same sort of structure, which is you get introduced to some characters that you immediately like, or there's something about them that you like, and then bad things start to happen. They begin to get obstacles and troubles and conflicts. And you start moving down this arc where you get to the very bottom part, where the next bad thing that happens means the couple was never going to get together, or the dinosaur is going to eat the person, or something, is going to end the film in a very negative way. But at that point, there's a turning point. And the turning point then turns everything around, and you end up often having a happy ending. And the thing about that turning point, it's usually something to do with the essence of the character, some skill that they have, or the message of that story comes at that turning point. So when Michael and I were sitting down to try to figure out the story of Muhammad and how we were going to tell it in film, that was what we were talking about. What's the story arc here? What's the turning point? Where are we moving towards? And we, sat around tables for a long time. We consulted many scholars. We read books. We were doing all this thing. And some of you may know the story of the Prophet Muhammad, so you may be thinking about in your own mind what the turning point is. But if we just follow that arc, we get to a message that I think is really the Prophet Muhammad speaking to us today. And so when you look at the story, first of all, he has the revelation. And some people may think, well, that's the turning point in the story. After all, he begins receiving the revelations. He's 40 years old when that happens. He's lived 2/3 of his life. But really, that isn't. That's actually what gets things moving in the down direction. Because the minute the revelations begin, all his conflicts start. He accumulates followers, but he gets more enemies. Eventually, he has so many enemies, they try to assassinate him. He has to flee from the city of Mecca to Medina. Now, some people might say, well, that's the turning point. He leaves Mecca, forms the first Islamic city, but the troubles continue. In Medina, 3 times Meccan armies come, attack. Once Muhammad is almost killed. In the very last conflict, though he wins, the city he's living in is deeply divided. And the people who originally had invited him to come there are beginning to doubt that it was a very good idea at all to have Muhammad there. And at that moment, we're going down that arc, and we're at that moment. And keep in mind, at this point, Muhammad is 2 years from his death. He's almost at the very end of his life. And at that moment, he decides to do something completely unexpected. He decides to wage a peace offensive. After all these years of fighting, after all this conflict, he organizes, some of his followers, many of them won't go, but he organizes them to go unarmed to Mecca on a pilgrimage. Gets there completely, the people of Mecca, his enemies who've been sworn to kill him 3 times, raise huge armies to try to wipe him out, are completely flabbergasted by this, don't know what to do. They end up making a treaty just to sort of let him go. And the entire Arabian Peninsula hears about this. And whereas at that point he only has a few hundred followers, thousands begin to join him because of the utter panache and the audacity to wage peace under such circumstances. Within a year, the Meccans themselves give up, decide to go along with this, and Muhammad dies 9 months later. So it was his peace offensive that is the reason Islam ever came to being. If he had not done that, the religion probably would have died when he died. He would have only had a few hundred followers then. He wouldn't have made the impression. And so, as we today are living in this time of great turmoil, we might want to remember that lesson. We are, again, grateful to the Rumi Forum for giving us this award for the work you do. But these awards are very important. They encourage this kind of work, the kind of efforts, the dialogues, encourage others to do this. And I want to say to all of you, whether you're Muslim or you're not Muslim, to think about this man 1,400 years ago, the lesson he taught us, which is whether in your actions, your words, or even if it's just in your heart, at this time of turmoil and conflict in which we live, to try to wage peace. Thank you very much.